Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Layman's Aviationist. In this episode, we will be covering the different instruments in the cockpit and how we utilize them throughout the flight. There are two panels that we generally use. First, let's look at the main panel. There are 6 instruments on the main dashboard for the particular plane that we will be using throughout this series. The configuration and placement can change depending on different planes, as these are customizable according to the pilot's intended use. These 6 instruments are the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, the attitude indicator, the roll indicator, the compass, and the variometer. The airspeed indicator is a speed gauge for the airplane. Its international unit of measurement is knots, but kilometers per hour and meters per hour is also sometimes used. This is measured by a pitot tube. The pitot tube measures the airspeed by the amount of air it receives per second. This is how a pitot tube looks like in a Cessna 172. The next instrument is the altimeter. The altimeter gives you your altitude. There are 3 main types of altitude. The first type is called your true altitude. This is your altitude above the mean sea level, also known as MSL altitude. The second type is called your absolute altitude. This is your altitude above ground level, also known as your AGL altitude. The third type is called your barometric altitude. This measures your altitude based on the atmospheric pressure. For example, if you want your altitude above MSL using barometric pressure, you must find the barometric reference of the sea level air pressure and put that into your altimeter. If you want the barometric reference of the ground, you can get it from an air traffic controller or something known as the ATIS, which is spelled as ATIS. This works on the principle that air pressure decreases the higher up you go and increases the closer you are to Earth. The next instrument is the attitude indicator. The attitude indicator is a gyroscopic ball that gives you information on the angle of embankment, which is known as roll, as well as the angle of attack, which is otherwise known as pitch, while using the horizon as a point of reference, which is represented by this little horizontal white line across the instrument over there. The roll indicator has some overlapping functions with the attitude indicator. Your roll indicator displays what side you're banking on. This is useful under IFR conditions. The next instrument is the compass. A compass is a navigational tool for finding out the heading of your aircraft. Last but not least, the variometer. This measures your rate of climb in meters per second. This measures how much altitude you gain or lose. It measures the rate of change in altitude by measuring the change in air pressure as you move up and down. Now, let's look at the secondary dashboard. In this particular plane, there are 5 instruments that we will be looking at on the secondary dashboard. These instruments are the tachometer, the clock, the fuel gauge, the oil temperature gauge, and the oil pressure gauge. The tachometer displays the number of times the propeller spins per minute in the thousands. This gives information on how hard the engine is working. I'm sure we are all familiar with the analog clock, but just for clarity's sake, the clock gives the pilot an accurate reading of the time. The fuel gauge tells you the amount of fuel remaining. This gauge represents the oil temperature gauge. If it is too low, the oil becomes thicker, resulting in a higher indicated oil pressure. If it is too high, the oil becomes runny, resulting in low pressure, which means that the engine isn't getting enough oil. This gauge represents the oil pressure gauge. If it is too low, it means that there might be a dangerous circulation issue where the oil is getting lost somewhere, suggesting a leakage. If it is too high, it suggests a blockage in the pipes, which can also be dangerous. In both scenarios, it is safer to land and get it checked out. Now that we are familiar with the different instruments in the cockpit, we will take off and see how each one is changed and influenced depending on the aircraft movement and operation. Here, we can see all the instruments we just talked about. We can do a few checks inside the cockpit to make sure everything runs smoothly. Once the engine is started, we will see that all the instruments come to life. We can then wait for the oil temperature and oil pressure to come to optimum levels. Once this is achieved, we can taxi to the runway. Lowering flaps can help you with your takeoff since it improves your aerodynamicity and increases the lift produced. Alright, so let's start our engines. Now we can see our propeller starting to move. We can see our RPM start to come up. Alright, now oil temperature. It is slowly but very surely rising. So is oil pressure. This is our main dashboard. Our speed is currently 0. We are stable according to our attitude indicator. We aren't banking or rolling on any one side. We are currently heading west, and we are not climbing or, well, descending, which is perfect as it perfectly describes our situation. So essentially what the panels do is, if we were blind, if the only thing we could see were these things, these would give us a pretty accurate reading of the aircraft's position and height, and it would essentially enable us to fly without actually ever looking through the windows. So now that the oil temperature has come up, let's go to the runway. Once aligned with the runway, lowering your flaps can help with your takeoff. As we can see on the plane, these are our flaps. Now lowering them actually makes the plane more aerodynamic as it produces more lift. However, as a trade-off, it also produces more drag. Now there is one more setting where it could lower even more. These are typically used for extremely short runways. However, today we have a nice long runway, so we don't have to worry about any shortages, so we can keep it on semi-extended, as this will produce a lot of lift and keep drag to a minimum. Now, let's say we have all of the clearance, right? We would put our throttle to full power, and once the nose of the plane automatically starts to lift a bit, we must control the angle of attack so that we don't get a tail strike, which is where the tail of your plane actually strikes the ground. The tail is also called the empennage. Now, once you reach into the air, you must climb to a certain altitude. Alright, so we have all clearances, we're all set, so let's get a bit higher in our seat so we have a better view, and yeah, let's put our throttle to full power. We must constantly add slight rudder inputs just to stay aligned on the runway. So if we get to a suitable speed, there we go, we can see it rising a bit. Alright, now if we look at our variometer, we can see that we're definitely climbing. On our altitude indicator, we can also see that we're about to reach 20 meters in altitude. We're automatically rising, and since both my variometer and altimeter display the same reading, we can safely assume that we're in the air. Now, it is obvious that we are in the air just by looking out of the window. However, it is less obvious when flying under IFR conditions, which is instrument flight rules. This means your view is completely obstructed, such as when you're flying in a cloud or a heavy thunderstorm. Now, let's climb to a suitable altitude, and then we can see how our information reflects on our instruments. Now, on our left, we can see a large mountain range. We go into third-person view. Let's stabilize. It is quite a large island with an airport on its right on its coast. So we can try climbing up a bit, and to see at what angle we are climbing up a bit, we can check our attitude indicator. We can also then keep track of this and keep it at a constant so that we don't stall. So, alright, Our altimeter seems to steadily be climbing. We're about to reach 700. Alright. Let's start to stabilize a bit now. Okay. Constantly using our altimeter just to make sure we're exactly on the horizon line. Not below, not above. This does require a bit of practice just so you know how it actually displays. Now that we're here, let's see how turning actually works. We can actually put our flaps back since we have reached our safe altitude. Our safe altitude just means that we're not at risk of hitting any of these ridges along the mountain tops. If we want to, we can try to circle back, just so that we have a nicer view of the sunset. Alright. Now, when turning or rolling to the left, we can see that our left aileron actually goes up a bit. Here, let's see that again. Here we go. And our right aileron, as a result, goes down. This is because we want the left wing, or the left part of the wing, to go down. So by doing that, we block off the wind. We want the right part of the wing to go up. Therefore, we make it go down, making it produce more lift so that it actually rises. And the exact same applies for turning to the right. Now, let's see how the variometer works. The variometer actually just measures the air pressure to see what rate we are climbing or ascending or descending at. So, right now, my angle of attack is a bit in the positive range. We can check that just by looking over here. We're not exactly on the horizon line. So, we can definitely see that our variometer is pointing at 1, maybe 1.5 meters per second. So, we are definitely climbing. This is also evident in our actual altimeter. We lost a bit of altitude there on our turn, which is why we're back at 600. But we are steadily moving into 650, and soon we will achieve 700 if we don't stabilize. Our airspeed actually does change with our angle of attack. For example, if I was to go into a complete nosedive, we can see it starting to rise. However, if I start to stabilize, go against the air, maybe even take a positive angle of attack, we can see it steadily start to decline. Let's stabilize. Now, if we were to roll to the left, our roll indicator would exactly show that. The exact same applies for the right. And last but not least, on our primary dashboard, our compass. If we were to start banking to the right and then pull up a bit just so that we actually change heading, we can see that our compass is definitely moving. For example, if we wanted to go to the east, we would keep moving till the nose of our plane on the compass pointed towards the large E. Once there, we will start to stabilize. And boom. We are now flying at a heading of east, also known as 90 degrees. Alright guys, that is it for this video series. I hope you really enjoyed. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe with your friends. Watch out for our next video, and I'll see you very, very soon. Later.